Now finally, I did tell you I would show you the I/O configuration tab. I saved the best for last. And this is one of the best new features of the new Q2 and iQ2 unit. So this is, remember, we're connected right now to an iQ unit. So what we have here is two tabs under the I/O configuration tab, or the I/O configuration section. You have two tabs. Now, if I click actuator, that is the inputs and outputs that are in the actuator with an iQ. So with a new iQ, you have 8 inputs and 4 outputs. Now the inputs are dedicated inputs. You can't configure them to be inputs or outputs. They are all either inputs, or the inputs are always inputs and the outputs are always outputs. Now what we can do here is we can select from any input or output a whole list of new functionality that we've offered in this new Q2 and iQ2 unit. So if you look here at the input number 1, if I click the down arrow, it gives me my whole selection of different I/O configurations. So we've got anti-drop clamp, anti-drop unclamp. These would be my clamp and unclamp requests for anti-drop circuitry. You can do an input. You could set it for an input for auto home, for dual float mode. That's for that. We talked about setting the tooling weight and the load weight, and we want to switch back and forth in a dual float mode. That's where you would do that. So all these different features that you see here are available with any input on the GeForce. So if you remember, when we were on our virtual limit tab, I'm going to keep this one set at a virtual limit. And if you remember, real quick, I'll shift back over here just to show you quickly as a refresher. And my virtual limits tab, remember we have this number here, and I can set up my virtual limits and set up different sets of virtual limits. Well, over here on the I/O configuration tab, this is where I can now select, if I select any input as a multi-zone virtual limit, it'll give me a box here. And then in that box, I put what set of virtual limits I want that input to activate. So that's my first set of virtual limits. Now my second set of virtual limits I set, I want to do the same thing. I want to do a multi-zone virtual limit, but I want this input to activate virtual limit set number 2. And again, we have 4 virtual limit sets out of the box. So I could continue on up to 4 virtual limit sets that I could set. So the next thing I want to talk about is, if you remember when we were on our speed tab, I showed you toggle speed. And again, I'll just shift back over there really quickly and show you the speed tab. And we talked about the toggle speed here and your custom jog speed. So go back over to the I/O configuration tab, and I have those features here as my toggle speed here. And I can set my jog up, and I can set my jog down. That easy. And now on my speed tab, I would go in and I would set what speed I would want that to go to. So when I turn on input number 3, it would take me to whatever speed I set for my toggle speed. And again, you remember, I can set those individually. I can set the speed the same in the up and down direction, or I can make it that when I hit activate input number 3, I go upward at 30% and downward at 60%, or anything I want to do there. And then input for number 4 would be my jog down speed that I set on my speed tab. And I set both of these as down. So let me set this as up one more time. Okay, there we go. So there's jog up and jog down. So if I activate input number 4, jog up, I set my speed on my speed tab. It'll jog up at whatever speed I want to, and the same thing with my jog down. Whenever I activate that input, it'll jog down at whatever speed I want it to go on my speed tab. So there's a whole bunch of different functionality here that we can select. I won't go into every one of these right now, but I just wanted to give you a quick view of how easy this is to set up. And then over here, you'll notice we can also set outputs, right? So there's a list of different functionality that you can assign to outputs as well, as to when an output will turn on. So you'll see here we could turn on an output when we get to an upper limit or a lower limit, or when the unit's in motion, or when my operator presence sensor is active, or when I have a fault indicator. We could also export or turn on an output when when I'm loaded or unloaded. While I'm in run mode, while I'm in float mode. So there's all these different conditions where I could turn outputs on, and I can simply just click them right here. So this would be, let's say we want to turn input number 1 on every time we're in e-stop engaged. And let me find that one, e-stop pressed. So we want to turn on output number 1. We want that to be an output confirmation that my e-stop is pressed. And then be output number 2. I want to use that for to make sure that every time I am in float mode, I want positive confirmation of that. So so there's a whole list of features that I can assign to any I/O point. So again, this is for the actuator. This is the iQ model, and that would be all the inputs that would be available in the actuator. Now in the Q2, there is no actuator I/O. There is only I/O at the handle, and I'll show you that in a minute. Now down here, I can clear all my outputs and input functionality here. I can also set to standard default. Or I can, every time I make changes, I do have to hit this button here and apply settings and restart. We'll move over to the I/O and handle tab, and what this is still within the I/O configuration tab. This is my input-output block. This is the I/O block for an iQ unit. Now, remember we were talking in the actuator, those inputs are either dedicated inputs or dedicated outputs. The I/O block is a little bit different. The I/O block can be each of those I/O points can be configured as either an input or an output. And now I can actually do that very easily. It used to be that you'd have to, if I wanted to change any of these functions, I have to do a custom program. Now with this user interface and how easy it is, I can simply press this button right here and change any input I want from an input to an output. And then I can select any list of those same features I just showed you from any input or any output from this pull-down menu right here. So that makes this really, really super flexible and puts a lot of power at your fingertips. That used to be the process for doing these changes used to be you have to call Gorbel, get a special program quote. There'd be a lead time associated with that, a cost associated with it, and now this is all done quickly right there at your fingertips. So this is really good stuff. And then over here, this is where the Q2 inputs and outputs are. Remember, there's limited inputs and outputs that never used to be. We didn't used to have any inputs or outputs on a Q model, but we've offered now 2 inputs, 2 dedicated inputs, and 2 dedicated outputs. So these can't be changed like the I/O block. But when you have a Q2, you're going to have 2 inputs, they're always inputs, and two outputs, they're always outputs. But you will be able to click and select the same functionality that I showed you over here. So we're not hooked up to a Q2 right now, we're hooked up to an iQ. So this is kind of grayed out, it's not functional. But if I was hooked to an iQ, this would be grayed out, but I would be able to click these down arrows and select any of those functions just like I can over here. So that is the I/O configuration tab, and I would say the most exciting part, one of the most exciting new features of the Q2 and iQ2 product, and one of the best parts of this, most valuable parts of the user interface. That concludes our tour of the Smart Connect user interface. I hope you enjoyed it. We did learn quite a bit, and I really do hope you get a lot of value out of this in the months and years to come. For now, this is Mark Randowski, and I'll say goodbye, but I do look forward to the time we get to spend together as you watch another video sometime soon.